everyone. My name is Daniel Cohen. I lead product strategy at Komodo, specifically with a focus on our go-to-market segments, so commercial, medical affairs, market access, all of that sort of in the pharma domain. I'm here with Carolina. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Carolina Trujillo. I'm one of the senior sales managers, sales engineering manager, leading the large pharma segment. We kind of bridge that gap between your use cases and our product. And then I'm here with Chad.
Hi, good to see everyone. Chad Forsey. I work in solution strategy at Komodo. It's really my job to work with our clients to make sure that they're getting the best value out of their investment in Komodo data, application, solution, software, and AI. And so I really work on your behalf internally, and I work across all teams in terms of large pharma and as well with some of our emerging clients.
Awesome. And we are here today to talk about turning insight into action. So this morning, you heard folks talk a lot about how we're using AI to turn data into insight. And that is really important. That has taken a lot of work historically to go from raw data to organized insight. But I think we all recognize that that is, maybe even half, probably less of the process. Having a PowerPoint deck that sits there and no one acts on is not enough. And so what we're going to talk about today is how AI is unlocking the ability to go even further, and how with agentic AI, you can now take insights and turn them more into action. I also want to recognize that every company, every brand, every team is going to be at a different stage of this journey. For some folks, you might say, hey, we want AI to be taking actions on behalf of folks, generating reports, orchestrating emails, et cetera. For others, it might be about how can AI deliver recommendations to the human in the loop? How do we surface those actions, those recommendations, that next best action to a sales rep, to an MSL? And others, it might be about how do we allow AI to take actions on behalf of folks to forage through the wealth of insights that we now have. So I want to acknowledge that up front because we're going to walk through a case example here. But I want to challenge the group to think through, like, where are you on that journey? And also, what's the biggest challenge that you face today? You'll see this in the demo, but for some folks, it might be, how do we find physicians or patients in a rare disease? For others, it might be, we have a really great understanding of the universe of patients and physicians. We need to figure out what that action is and how do we focus reps and other stakeholders that are executing on that. So what we're going to walk through today are two examples of how we're seeing folks do this. We're going to focus on generalized myasthenia gravis, or GMG. It's a rare neuroimmunological disorder. Up until a couple of years ago, massive unmet need. Basically, patients were treated with corticosteroids, trying to suppress the disease, but really not the ability to treat it. And in the last couple of years, we've seen a wealth of new therapies come to market, different mechanisms of action, addressing the underlying disease, great efficacy profiles, et cetera. So we thought it was an interesting space to look at. The first demo that we're going to look at is how can you use AI to translate HCP and HCO level insights into an on-strategy call and account plan. So great, we've used all of the underlying data to create profiles of these HCPs. What do we do about it? How do we turn it into something actionable for the field? The second demo is going to be building on that even further. So as I mentioned, this is a rare disease. While there's a lot of visibility into patients, there's a lot of misdiagnosis and underdiagnosis as well. So we're going to see how you can use generative AI to actually build a predictive model that you can then feed into that action plan and help reps figure out where are those patients. So with that, I think we're going to switch over to the demo screen. I'm going to get out of the way, and I'm going to turn it over to Chad.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. Daniel really teed it up well. We're in a position now where we're looking at a Marmon experience, and we're looking at GMG. But imagine your organization, your brand, your patients in similar context. What we've done here is we've essentially created a custom agent defined using your business rules, your institutional knowledge, your clinical definitions, uniquely aligned to your market baskets. All of that built within the framework of the agent as contextual data products that sit on the back end within a project folder, or clinical nuance and business rules that are built into the agentic workflow. From there, how do we start to evaluate a population at large? We have GMG, Daniel mentioned, we have a lot of patients historically have been on corticosteroids, new advanced therapies in market like FcRn inhibitors as well as C5 inhibitors. How can we extract that insight and information from claims data to start driving initiative, to start really getting the right types of actionable insights from high-level claims data, raw data product out to our strategic accounts and then ultimately to the field teams. So with a natural language question on the side, but with that custom agent experience on the back end, it's like, let's get an understanding of these two product classes, and ultimately we want to dive into, what is the unique contextual nuance around an HCO? How can we then better engage a specific provider that we know is, treating these patients and might have, patients that aren't on therapy that would benefit from therapy. So you see a high-level view of the market basket here. We see Vyvgart at top, Ultomiris, et cetera, kind of a breakout between both drug classes and, in terms of adoption trends. And we can continue to scroll up, Carolina, as well. So from a headquarters perspective, right, this is kind of framing the context of how do we see our patients, where do we see our patients, and how do we trend adoption over time. So monthly reporting, looking at total patients, looking at specific modalities. We see the FcRn and the C5 inhibitors, ultimately to get us to a point where it's like, all right, we take this global view and we want to bring that down in a way that we can start really driving insights, driving adoption, and driving behavior. And so at a high level, we asked for 25 institutions. Show us the top 25 institutions that are managing care for patients that are diagnosed with GMG. And it provides us this nice ranking and visualization here. And it's also starting to incorporate that class breakout between both the FcRn and C5 inhibitors. So we can isolate and focus on one. Let's drive in a bit deeper. Let's find out a specific nuance and maybe one that has equal adoption between both drug classes. Why is that adoption happening? What's ultimately driving prescriber behavior and treatment guidelines? And so I really like this visual too. I think that what you're able to see here is volumes by size of the bubble and ultimately adoption by what type of institution they are and do they prefer one drug class over the other. Daniel or Carolina, anything that you would add just in terms of what we're seeing here and then the direction that we're going to move forward?
No, I think you teed it up nicely. One of the things that Chad mentioned earlier is this is sort of starting with that overarching view of how do you contextualize the market. And I think now we're going to zoom layers and layers deeper to figure out, based on this view, how do I act on it?
Carolina, anything? Anything you would add as well?
Nope, not right now.
So let's dive into one specific institution. So we had the overview, we're looking at the top 25 institutions, and now we want to start getting strategic. So we've selected here Ochsner Health System, which is based out of Louisiana, but a large IDN. And we want to start informing, from a headquarters perspective, what is this institution like? What's the overall makeup? How many GMG patients do we see flowing through this IDN? How many of those patients are on therapy? How many aren't being treated? And then we start to profile the providers that make up the care team, like, in terms of, treatment patterns. Or do we see a disproportionate number of patients that are just not activated on therapy with certain providers? Or do we see adoption trending higher for C5 inhibitors versus the FcRn inhibitors? And then how might we use that information that's all available at the patient level and in the claims to start driving strategic messaging out to individual providers through the field team? So as we scroll up, we'll see that, again, we have top 15 providers. We start to get this really rich insight around their clinical practice. And we'll get to number 3 here, Carolina. We're going to stop right here with Dr. Hargrave. So, maybe as a member of the strategic accounts team, you get a good understanding of Ochsner Health. You get a good understanding of where adoption is, and you're looking at this one specifically, and you're like, there's a clear market opportunity here where we could lean in a bit because we're seeing that 22 patients are on no advanced therapy. But Dr. Hargrave has also used both C5 and FcRn inhibitors. But I need more information. Where can I get that information? Can it come from our institutional knowledge? We've pulled in information from our CRM. All of this information also sits relevant within Komodo's contextual data, like our HCP and HCO master, as well as all of the underlying claims data that helps inform the clinical nuance. So taking a step deeper.
One thing I want to call out here, because I think what you're seeing in each of these HCP and account profiles is 2 elements. The first is the fact base on that HCP. How many patients are they treating? What therapies are they on? What's the mix, et cetera? What you're seeing below is messaging and thinking around, well, how might I start communicating with this HCP or this account? One of the things that I want to clarify is that this is not just coming from Marmot thin air or from like the underlying model. We didn't mention this at the beginning,
Double-click.
but Chad uploaded a messaging plan beforehand. So Marmot is able to pull from the Komodo underlying claims data, but it is also able to pull from your files, your institutional knowledge. That might be everything from your zip to tear file, how do I define the territory for a rep? It might be your account hierarchy. Here are the physicians that we have assessed are in Ochsner's field of influence, but it can also be things like your messaging plan. And we recognize that for each organization, that's going to be very specific to you. That's going to be what your strategy is. That's going to be what you're comfortable with reps saying. And so I wanted to clarify that because this is not just a, hey, let's generate messaging plans out of thin air. We are not here to do that. It's about how do we direct the agent to your messages so that if you say, hey, a physician that is of this archetype should be asked these questions, that it can pull that information and surface it to the rep and make their jobs a bit easier. And I think that's where Chad's going to continue for the agency.
And to level set a little bit what Daniel and Chad are saying too is the flexibility that Marmot has. So even if we look at the landscape, we look at the utilization, this is data, claims data, but if you have your own data, this is something we can incorporate. So you have a more precise output that you can then iterate on. Even just going back to what they've presented, we went from a treatment landscape, then we went into top institution, to see where we want to focus. Marmot is giving you the direction, but you can also iterate with Marmot and explain and ask, why are we selecting this specific criteria? Why are we doing this specific business rule? And it's something that it's an interactive workflow with Marmot. And then ultimately, as Daniel said, for this next stage, you can add your own business rules. You have the ability to do that. You have the ability to do it at the agent level, which is what the agentic AI empowers you to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And great context for both Daniel and Carolina. I think that if I think about it as well, it's like, gone are the days where you have to rely on Komodo to define everything for you, or consultancy to define everything for you. You're able to bring together the institutional knowledge. You're also able to reference really strong third-party APIs. Like this is also referencing all phase 3 clinical trials for each product within the market basket to help frame compliance and understanding of what is on label, what is this product indicated for. So all of this rich information, and how do we then take that internally, right? We've provided some insights on strategic account planning, looking at real-time adoption trends, looking at trends across product utilization, trying to get an understanding like how that fits with maybe your most recent messaging plans. How should you maybe adopt in real time based on what we're seeing happening in terms of prescribing behaviors? And then let's take it one step further. So imagine you're working in headquarters, you've defined the market basket, you're working with the strategic accounts team, and it's like, we want the rep to feel empowered to have the best, most optimal engagement with the provider in real time, because we all know how hard it is, right? And you might go to an institution, and specifically Ochsner, there's 15 top traders of GMG across that organization. What if you could step in an institution and all of this information is readily available for you? All you have to do is shift to a different doctor profile. So when we double click on Dr. Hargrave, it starts framing for us, because the context that Daniel described, what is most relevant to Dr. Hargrave? Let's talk about the clinical practice. Let's talk about adoption trends for Zilebresk and Restigo. Let's then look at what is the makeup in terms of adoption? What does the patient distribution look like? And what is the sequential treatment profile for Dr. Hargrave as well? You can see here that there's been a period of time where Vyegart was preferred, and then a patient trial through Ultomiris and Imave. But can we explain that? Can we get better context to why these decisions are happening? We scroll up just a little bit further. You get a strong explanation.
Before we do, Chad, what I want to also highlight here is the collaboration. This is one prompt, this is one analysis. So think of your data scientists, your data analysts, develop the first 2 reports, but now your field team can have access now to develop this kind of talk track, to have this engagement with their HCPs or with their MSLs.
Absolutely. And that collaboration, and same bringing the field time insights back up to institutions as well, like with CRM data and CRM notes. So you have this perpetual wheel of generating real-time insights from the field. If we focus on what does that provider phenotype look like, we want to break it into 4 categories. Who is Dr. Hargrave? We kind of see here that is he looking to fall does Dr. Hargrave fall into the bucket of steroid minimization specialist? Well, that would be a secondary category based on what we see in his clinical volume and what we see across adoption trends. Is he working specifically in a subtask that's focusing more on MuSK and the dynamics of patients, and ultimately, what is the ACHR plus population, and how are neurologists responding and treating the uniqueness within that specific patient category? Or are we looking at what is the greatest opportunity for messaging? And this is where we see here that we're looking at the lead priorities around stability and compliance, access and efficiency, and that there's an early investigation opportunity given the total number of untreated patients at this time within Dr. Hargrave's clinical practice. So for both Zilebresk and Rystiggo, we're going to focus on Zilebresk here at the top, and you'll see it as we scroll through it. We've incorporated the call plan messaging. So this is compliant, this is defined, it's approved by your marketing, it's approved by your medical teams. How can this rep then draw upon the insight that's clinically relative to a provider, but also on label and appropriate, and taking real-time data and insights so that you're messaging in a way that's most relevant to the current market trends. And up front, it's going to provide clinical nuance. So the clinical goals for this rep within this call is to introduce Zilebresk as the only self-administered subcutaneous C5 inhibitor. When you look across the total utilization of products, we know that, that both the FcRn as well as the other C5s have been used within Dr. Hargrave's practice. And so this is a standalone differentiator for Dr. Hargrave when we're thinking about Zilebresk. And then in terms of positioning the sub-Q injection as a self-injected and creating efficiencies and quality of life advantages based on his patient population being more Medicare and older. And then, not to drain the entirety of this, but then how can we then take insight to action for the field rep? And Caroline, we'll just go back just a little bit. Strategic positioning. What does a rep need to know relative to Dr. Hargrave has a lot of options that he can choose. He can maintain patients on corticosteroids. He can evaluate a combination of both FcRn, C5, or a combination between just based on patients are responding. So what would you need to know going into that practice that makes your brand, your therapy, your medical intervention most uniquely aligned to creating an advantage for how his patients are being treated? Then because we've provided the messaging that's approved by marketing, we now have HCP-specific tailored messaging for Dr. Hargrave. And it's providing suggestion here. And the clinical validation point, when you look at the data point section here, is it's also just referencing, you have the ability to reference phase 3 clinical trials with the RAISE study, giving clinical context to a conversation where you want to be able to ultimately define what's best for your patients with clinical nuance and driving the most effective messaging. It gives you a suggestion for a conversational opener. It's providing access and administration considerations, safety considerations. And at the end, as a former rep, what I really love is that you also see that there's objection handling. All of that to say that if we get to the very bottom of the list, now a rep has been informed. They've been provided insights that was handed to them by the field. These can be refreshed on a weekly basis. We can push them into a CRM. We can send them to the rep's email. They can pull all this insight up on their iPads. How do they then go about planning action for their day? We know Ochsner matters. The strategic accounts team told us so. We know that marketing has approved the messaging. We know this messaging is relevant. We know that it's impactful. Now we have Marmot prepare the pre-call checklist. And all of these things, in terms of how you're going into an engagement with a provider, are very relevant based on your product across the competitors in this space. So a good reference point. I think that from here, you can imagine your products, your brands, your patients, right? And this serving as a scaffold, right? This cascade of insight generation where we start at, just give me a treatment landscape. Let me help better understand where patients are. What type of providers are they touching? What type of therapeutic options are available? And then focus uniquely on an institution where you can address any type of bias geographically, any type of adoption trends that might be unique based on academic centers or rural centers, based on access to care dynamics. And then look at a specific clinical practice. And this would apply to any brand, any organization, any patient population. And have real-time tailored messaging that aligns and is on label. It's approved by medical. It's approved by your leadership team. And it's not stale data. It's actionable data. It's real-time data that's feeding this insight and then reproducible on a regular basis. And that's really where we start changing the game, where we take insight that we have that's available in claims data. We then infuse it with information that we create this perpetual loop of institutional knowledge, bringing in the field team insights, creating a data product that the custom agent can work on that's the latest and greatest, empowered and populated by all members of your team and your organization. And then how do we use that in a structured way to make reps more effective at bringing therapy to patients? Carolina and Daniel, anything that you would add to that as we kind of pull to the end?
So I think I referenced this a little bit earlier, but there's 3 things that I want to call out related to the flexibility and the customization that I imagine some folks in the audience might be thinking. One, you might be thinking, this is a lot of information. I do not want to have to give a massive report to my rep. I would say to that, great. We can tailor what's coming out of there. Like there can be an executive summary, there can be a synthesized version. You can say, I just want to populate it with the 3 questions that they should go in asking. So there's a lot of ability to customize what the agent delivers depending on the audience. The second, as I mentioned earlier, you might be saying, this is awesome. I actually don't want to put the messaging in there. I just want to focus on like, what's the HCP profile? What segment do they fall into? I want the messaging to be handled by my rep. To which I would also say, that's great. We can customize the agent so that it does that whole first part. And then your messaging sits elsewhere and you say, hey, the rep is the one who is going to act on that. The third thing you might say is, this is really cool. I have other systems that my folks operate in, to which I would also say, great. You heard from Paul Gurney earlier that we are very flexible in terms of our ecosystem, where you want to build. If you say, I love this information, but I don't need my rep logging in here, it's difficult enough to get them into the CRM, well, guess what? We can deliver it in the CRM, we can deliver it as reports, we can deliver it as dashboards there. So there's a lot of flexibility as you think, how does this plug into your ecosystem? And what is the problem that you're trying to solve? So that's what I wanted to add.
You can even imagine a world too where this is provided as a report, and we all live in a world of reporting. The idea is that this is a better report. Right? It's based on real-time insights. It's then structured and aligned to your business. But this can sit behind a user experience with a deterministic opportunity where you've defined the right types of questions that you know that your reps would ask. So none of this information is available. They come in, they identify a provider, and they tell me, what is the latest with Dr. Hargrave? And it will then populate based on what you define that type of response should be. What type of clinical nuance should I be aware of? You know, what are prescribing patterns? As well, the same type of question. You might want 5 or 10 or 15 questions that you know your reps will ask on a regular basis, but give them the option to ask based on the profile of the provider they're going to see or the institution that they're at, that they will be visiting. And so for us, as Daniel said, we will meet you where you are. That is the goal. The goal is to take your insights and ours, to marry them together into an integrated solution using agentic AI and optimizing your team's advantage at converting raw data into actionable insights as quickly as possible. And with that, I think we'll turn it over.
Yeah, so we're gonna transition over to the other demo. But before, I do wanna ask like 1 or 2 questions to the group. How many of you have worked on a rare or specialty product where finding patients has been a challenge? A lot of us. How many of you have worked on a product where finding those patients cannot cleanly be defined by ICD codes in claims? How many of you have tried to build a predictive model in order to find those patients? Great. So I think a lot of folks have familiarity with at least the process of what we're going to show. What Caroline is going to demonstrate is how do we take that process, cut down significantly the cost and time to develop and deploy, and make it accessible to more folks in the organization so that it's easier for you to go after those patients, whether they can be defined well by an ICD code, an NDC, or whether you need to predict based on misdiagnosis, underdiagnosis, et cetera. So back to the demo for Carolina.
Thank you. So what we're showing here is something that you are familiar with, whether you're a data scientist or you're using this now. It's a predictive model to find patients. In this case, we're asking Marmot to help us create a model for GMG patients that are diagnosed but first usage of any of the drugs within the market basket. I also indicated to use an SVD and XGBoost and run about 30 iterations so that we can build that model. The first report that you're seeing here is that pre-model report where it's taking in, again, analyzing the codes. What are we using? What are the features and the characteristics that we will use for our specific flags for this alert? You'll notice it pulled in about 186,000 patients. Then it has a training set and the test set. But then primarily here looking at the cohort characteristics. So age, gender distribution, race and ethnicity. What are those features that are prominent with this patient population? And then further even looking at clinical activities and profiles. What's important here is that as Marmot is iteration and producing this model, you have the ability to question Marmot again and start asking, why are we focusing more on this? Why aren't we incorporating a specific other criteria that's not mentioned? This allows you in real time to make those changes until current workflows, not until the model is deployed and you're testing the model, running the model to find those gaps. So this is the first initial evaluation, and then it produces a training report. This is very high level. This is just basically iterating that it's using the configuration that I asked it to use, and then just kind of giving high level performance metrics for these analyses. Once it's doing that, it gives me the full evaluation report. So jumping into this report now, it actually generated the model. It gave me an executive summary of what the model produces. You can see that it also does the ROCAUC, PRAUC, running a lot of those benchmarks here. And you'll see the different curve analyses here. But again, each step of the way, each report, this is the opportunity for your team, for you to make those changes or any kind of additional additions. So here, as you can see, it also will call out certain things that it's finding. And what it does, on top of just producing a model for you, it goes down, here's a risk stratification, it's bucketing the patients into specific tiers that we'll use in the model. But what I really appreciate that this agentic AI will do is that it takes a model, it takes the information you gave it, but then it also gives you best actionable insights. So what are those actions that you should be considering? And advanced refinement. So again, allowing you to, in real time, make these changes for the model. Now, similar to kind of the talk track that we're saying here is, how do we bring this into an actionable insight? So again, right now, if we think of the models right now, your data scientists are producing these models. It gives a deliverable of an HCP list. You either push that into your CRM, or you push it into some other type of analyses program. But what we can do now with agentic Marmot is you can build that model and start iterating on that model within your organization, within your teams. So in this specific one, similar to the talk track that we're doing now, it's an HCP engagement strategy. So Chad's example was actually very elaborate, right? It gave you the talk tracks. It gave you how to approach these HCPs, who to target specifically. But now when we run this model, which you can run daily, weekly, it gives you now, back to that stratification, it actually provided those high-risk tier patients that we should be focusing on. And then because I wanted an actionable HCP engagement strategy, it's now giving me different iterations or different outputs of how I should be looking at these HCPs. So depending on your specific criteria, what your approach would be, you can look at it at the patient volume. So this is a great categorization of looking at those tier patients at the patient volume, HCP per patient volume. You could also see it at the specialty. So if you want to focus more on the specialty, understanding more of that referral network, who are all the specialists that these patients are seeing, you can also have that detailed. So it's not just one NPI list, it's several different versions of NPI lists that you can focus on. Anything you guys want to add?
No, I just, when you consider like what goes into this on the back end, right? We started the other example with, we're building a unique custom agent based on your business. We bring in your business rules, we bring in your institutional knowledge, and that's ultimately what you do with the information. But what feeds that model? What feeds that agent? And this is an opportunity where you can bring in machine learning, you can leverage agentic AI to its fullest capacity, and start looking forward. Like, who's next? What patient is next? Where will patients show up in terms of patients that need treatment? And then being able to use that and take that insight then from headquarters and say, we're gonna start populating call lists for our reps. So instead of them waking up and saying, maybe I'll go to Ochsner today, you say, no, based on what we're seeing on clinical volume, you should absolutely go to Ochsner today, because there's a high probability that Dr. Hargraves likely have a patient that's diagnosed that it will be initiating therapy within a 30 or 60-day time window. And when you see him, these are the things that you should say based on this feeding the model to then start that next action and then ultimately deliver a better message. And this is just one example of how you can leverage your modeling, your tooling, our modeling, our tooling, and the skills within the agentic experience to drive better and deeper insights for your teams.
Here's another example that I also wanted to highlight where Marmot takes it to the next level for you. So it gave you the basic patient volume at the specialty breakdown, but now this is where it's looking at those top tier HCPs, the ones that have the high risk patients, and it's already categorizing it for you where it's looking at the average score of greater than 0.2 And then it's looking for those HCPs that have 3 or more patients. This should be your high-risk HCPs that you should be engaging with, if that's the strategy. So it's taking it to that next level as well, giving you in a different way to kind of think through your own strategies. And then going back to that engagement, in this particular output, I'm going to go all the way down, it's actually giving you a next 30 days immediate action plan based on all the outputs from this particular model and this engagement strategy. And the great news here too is think about the workflows that you have now, whether you still want to push this to your CRM, you can. And you have different iterations of different NPI lists for different strategies. If you want to push it to an agent similar to the one that Chad produced, that's also the capability that you have here too.
I would also say, and I often like saying this to clients, I am not a data scientist, I am not a clinician, maybe a hack analyst at best. And the agent or the workflow you saw before is something that I was able to do on my own computer with some clinical nuance provided by some trusted colleagues to ultimately put me on a direction where I could start ultimately driving really compelling insights around a patient population where there's an unmet need. Carolina as well, not a data scientist, not a clinician by any context. We worked with a very intelligent individual that's part of our predictions team internally that's helped build the tool and application that ultimately powered this output, but she was the one that used it. So she applied this in a way, she understands enough clinical nuance and enough about the statistical modeling and ultimately what the output should look like, that she's able to leverage this in a way to get to the point of reporting that then provides actionable insights for the field. And so the user barrier has never been lower, right? I think we acknowledge, and Daniel mentioned this before, is we meet you where you are. What makes sense based on the makeup of your team? What makes sense based on the type of reps that you have? What makes sense based on the uniqueness of your product? And we allow you to define that, and then we work with you to optimize what that experience would be like.
Cool. So I think we're going to go back to the slides, and having shown you that, I think a lot of folks might be wondering, okay, like that's a really cool point solution, that's a really cool point solution. How does this all come together? And I'm hoping that the slides come back in a second because I did want to show this. We've been having a lot of conversations with various commercial leaders who are thinking about like, what does this system look like of agentic orchestrated AI in the future? And this is an example flow that we've worked with a couple of folks on. So you could imagine a world where you are using the underlying data, Komodo and other sources, to come up with a variety of characteristics around HCPs. Not just things like clinical volume. I mean, we've been doing deciling for years, decades, but things like prescribing behavior. How are they switching? How are they actually prescribing? Like, how are patients moving through? Access profile. What's the mix of payers there? What does uptake look like at payers, especially where we might have favorable access? Incorporating predictive models like the one that Carolina built to basically generate always-on HCP and HCO profiles, like much richer than what we have today, but on a daily basis being refreshed by what is going on with that HCP, what's new, what's changed. You can then imagine integrating that with your brand messaging plan based on HCP profiles, what segment they fall into, what do we want to say to them? What questions do we want to ask? What messages do we want to articulate? What collateral do we want to leave behind? Ultimately, this turns into personalized call and account plans for reps. How do we ensure that we are really understanding the customer that we are talking to, whether it's an institution, whether it's a specific site, or whether it's an HCP? What's also cool is you can imagine a closed loop around this. So after that interaction, I'm recording information in the CRM. I'm recording that I had an interaction, maybe they went to a speaker program, what did we talk about, what were the follow-ups? Well, guess what? I can now feed that into my HCP profile so that next time when I have my personalized plan, I'm following up on what did we talk about last time. I'm surfacing in real time, who are the important HCPs that I haven't spoken to in 3-4 months? And you basically create this always-on orchestration loop that is surfacing insights and making it very easy for your execution teams to do their job, and so that they can really focus on spending time with customers. Now, today, we talked about this in a sales example. How do you have a personalized on-strategy account and call plan? Importantly, though, insights to action is not just a sales activity. You could also imagine this with access and pull-through. So how am I optimizing access based on account level payer mix, claims adjudication patterns? Are there sites where I'm seeing a lot of rejections, even though I have favorable access? Do I need to help those physicians with prior authorizations, with pull-through? You could also apply it in medical affairs, thinking about where are care gaps, where are patients not being tested, where are they not receiving standard of care, where are there issues with diagnosis, where it's taking significantly longer than median, and ensuring that you're engaging with KOLs and institutions on where the greatest unmet need is. You could also see it in patient services. How do you segment patients based on where their true barriers are to starting and staying on therapy and personalized engagement there? And then also clinical development. When you think about site selection, investigator selection, when you think about referral mapping and finding patients in the context of clinical trials. So wanted to highlight that while we spoke about this in the commercial standpoint, this notion of insights into action is really an enterprise construct. So with that, I think we've gone through our slides. We're gonna have a Slido for folks to answer, and we're also happy to take any questions, either about some of the stuff that we showed or some of the frameworks that we've been using with customers who are thinking about this.